As a leader, there are so many different personalities that you're working with on a daily basis. In order to be an effective leader, you need to know how to motivate, lead, and persuade these diverse personalities. This course will teach you just that and more. My name is Kwame Christian. I'm a business lawyer, mediator, professor, and the director of the American Negotiation Institute, where we conduct negotiation and conflict resolution trainings that make your difficult conversations easier. I'm also the host of the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything. By the end of this course, you will gain the skills that you need to lead and motivate any individual on your team. I'm excited to help you take your leadership skills to the next level. So let's jump into the course. As a leader, your role is to guide your team in the right direction. Now, this sounds easy, but we both know that it's not. One of the biggest reasons why it's challenging is because each person on your team is different. But understanding the psychology of personality can help you to understand these differences so you can become a better leader. Let's start off by getting clear on what I mean by personality. Well, personality is the unique way that someone navigates the world, and it consists of patterns of thought and behavior. A blanket approach to persuasion and motivation is going to have limited efficacy. This is because people's personalities will lead them to respond differently to what you say and do as a leader. Understanding individual personalities allows you to lead, persuade, and motivate more effectively. You'll be able to customize your message to the person in front of you. Now, there are 5 personality traits that are measured on a sliding scale. An easy way to remember this is with the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, which is also known as emotional stability because the word neurotic can sometimes sound like an insult. After decades of researching personality, psychologists began to come to a consensus on the key personality traits in the 1980s and dubbed these 5 characteristics the Big 5 personality traits. One of the most important things to understand about this framework is that none of these are either or propositions. And what I mean by that is you're not agreeable or disagreeable, extroverted or introverted. Each trait is assessed on a scale. So the question isn't whether or not you have the trait, it's how high or how low you are in that specific trait. For example, an extrovert that is high in agreeableness is very different from an extrovert who is low in agreeableness. One of the most important aspects of understanding personality is the necessity of a significant sample size. How many data points do you have? You can't make an assessment of someone's personality in a day or a week. It takes time. For example, let's say after 3 weeks in a role, you identify someone as disagreeable. But what if they just experienced a death in their family? Then you've mislabeled someone based on a mood, not a trait. Moods can change, traits remain the same. Before you start trying to label others, let's start off by labeling yourself. Where do you think you fit within the Big 5 personality traits? This self-analysis will give you good practice. Self-awareness is the best place to begin. When you think about the word motivation, what do you think about? Now, when I'm talking about motivation, I am not talking about the type of rah-rah motivation that you see on stages where you get people really excited to improve themselves. Those high energy events create hyper emotional states that make people want to act in the moment. The problem is that this type of motivation cannot be maintained for long periods of time. Eventually, the emotions will fade, and most of the time, the positive behaviors will fade along with them. So what is motivation? When I'm talking about motivation, I'm talking about the things that drive people regardless of how they are feeling in the moment. You can't fully understand someone's personality unless you know what motivates them. Motivation answers the question, what drives people in a specific direction? And just like with the Big 5 personality traits, if you can understand somebody's consistent motivations, then you can start to predict their behavior, which in turn allows you to be a more persuasive leader. There are 3 types of motivation. Power motivation, which is the degree to which you want to have influence over other people. Affiliation motivation, which is the degree to which you want to be with other people, and achievement motivation, which is the degree to which people are motivated by winning and racking up accomplishments. What motivates you? Do a quick self-assessment. The answer might surprise you. I like to think about persuasion like going on a journey. You know where you want to go, but sometimes you're not exactly sure how to get there. Not surprisingly, one of the things that you're going to want on your journey is a map. Understanding the psychology of personality and motivation gives you the roadmap that you can use to lead your team to the ultimate destination. Persuasion is one of the most important leadership skills. It's the process of getting someone to change their behavior. There's an internal component to persuasion and an external component. We need to change the way that people think and feel, this is the internal piece, in order to change their behavior, which is the external piece. Remember, even though we're all created equally, we're not created the same. Different people are going to have different personalities and are going to be motivated by different things. This means that the personality roadmap is going to look different for each person on your team. So you might be asking yourself, Kwame, are you saying that I need to customize my persuasive approach for each person on my team? Well, yes and no. So yes, when you're having a one-on-one interaction with the people on your team, you want to make sure that your message is custom tailored to the person who's sitting in front of you. However, it's important to realize that oftentimes you're communicating with multiple people at the same time. And in that case, it's more difficult to customize the message for the personalities in the room. So what do you do if you have to persuade multiple people at the same time? In that situation, you have to create a general persuasive message to give to the group. Oftentimes, certain types of professions attract certain types of personalities. And if you can recognize that, you might be able to craft a general message that still speaks to the personalities in the room. Then, if you realize that some of the members on your team are not fully committed, you can have a one-on-one meeting. And that's where you can have that personal conversation and customize the message based on their unique personality and motivators. Next time you're in a meeting with someone from your team, ask yourself, what do I know about their personality? What motivates them? And then you can think through what you can do to personalize your message. Understanding someone's level of extroversion is important because it has such a massive impact on the way that people navigate the world. Let's take a look at what you can do to lead extroverts more effectively. But first, let's talk about what it means to be an extrovert. People who are high in extroversion get energy from social interactions, so they look for opportunities to connect and communicate with other people. They tend to be talkative and assertive. They're not afraid to advocate for their ideas. People who are high in extroversion should be placed in roles that give them an opportunity to have high levels of social interaction. They lose energy, motivation, and drive when they feel isolated. They would be well suited for roles like business development, sales, and reception. When it comes to leading extroverts, getting a clear commitment is an important part of the process because extroverts process both internally and externally. The problem here is that sometimes you think you have a commitment when you don't. So here's an example of what I mean. One of the most interesting things about extroverts is that they need to process verbally or think out loud. So you end up getting passing thoughts instead of true commitments. In one of my earlier leadership roles, one of my team members was highly extroverted. In meetings, he loved to brainstorm with people and think through ideas. When people would hear his ideas, they would get excited and want to move forward. The problem was that people would assume that these were commitments. In reality, talking through these ideas was his way of processing. So as you're working with extroverts, clarify commitments and next steps. The next thing you want to do is allow them to persuade themselves. Since extroverts tend to process externally, you may be impeding their ability to think through things by dominating the conversation. When it comes to persuading extroverts, you need to ask a lot of open-ended questions and get them to talk. They will tell you how they think and feel about the situation. The more information you get, the more persuasive you can be because now you have a better understanding of the situation. Next time you're talking to the extrovert on your team, remember to ask a lot of questions and be sure to clarify throughout the conversation so you don't mistake their thoughts with commitments. Stephen Hawking once said, "Quiet people have the loudest minds." And in many ways, he was right. Let's look at what you can do to bring the best out of the introvert on your team. But before we do that, we need to talk about what it means to be an introvert. Introverts tend to gain more energy from their inner life more so than their outer life. A common myth about introverts is that they dislike social interaction. This isn't necessarily the case. It's just that introverts tend to thrive in smaller groups and in one-on-one interactions. This allows them to go deeper in the conversation and is less taxing on their energy reserves. So you need to allow them to take the time that they need to process internally. Introverts tend to process on a deeper level in silence. If you interrupt that process prematurely, you may miss out on vital information because they haven't fully processed the information. Here's an example. My chief operating officer, Catherine, is the model introvert. Sometimes when we're having conversations, I ask a question and I'm greeted with silence. And this can feel awkward at times, but I never, ever interrupt that silence. Why? Because she's thinking. So here's a quick trick. If you struggle in silence, take that time to count. Don't make the mistake of thinking about what you're going to say next. Counting is an easy way to stay in the moment and maintain your active listening. So what else does this mean for you as a leader? If you're working with an introvert, recognize that you may not get the best results communicating with them in a large meeting. You may need to shift to a setting that's more intimate. It might make more sense to chat with them before or after the meeting to ensure the greatest level of engagement. That personal touch can make all the difference. So remember, introverts are powerful assets to your team because of their deep and thorough processing style. So make sure you give them the time and space they need to think. You've probably heard of introverts and extroverts before, but not everyone on your team will fit into a specific category or box. Remember, introversion and extroversion are on a scale, and most people will end up being some blend of the two. Someone who falls between introvert and extrovert is known as an ambivert or centrovert. This means that they will have some parts of themselves that are more extroverted and some parts of themselves that are more introverted. This is me. So I conduct full-day negotiation and conflict resolution workshops, both in person and online. And I do keynote speeches. I speak in front of crowds and I do a lot of mingling. So people think that I'm really high on the extroversion scale, but the reality is that I'm an ambivert and social interactions with large groups exhaust me. After one of these events, I usually try to spend the rest of the day recharging by myself. So what can you do if you realize that you're leading an ambivert? Pay attention to your timing. If you realize that your team member may be exhausted after social interactions, honor that and work around it. You may want to try to have deep conversations with them before social events because they may not have the energy to fully engage with you afterwards. You also might recognize that it is better to break this conversation into smaller pieces that I like to call micro negotiations, instead of trying to have one big conversation because that can be emotionally draining for them. One thing to keep in mind is that ambiverts are regularly mislabeled because the extroverted side of the personality is so much easier to see. Whenever you're assessing somebody's personality, remember that it's on a sliding scale. Don't jump to conclusions too quickly. If you've seen the title of this video, you may wonder, what's the point? Isn't it easy to lead agreeable people? Well, yes and no. Let's start off by defining what we mean by agreeable. Agreeable people are friendly, polite, and like working with other people. They tend to be very helpful, empathetic, and trusting, and they're generally optimistic and see the best in others. Agreeable people thrive in roles that allow them to be helpful and create connections. If you give them the opportunity to lean into that part of their personality, then they will shine. But before you think this is all too easy, I want to let you know that there is a hidden challenge when leading agreeable people. The challenge is that agreeable people often struggle with compliance at times. But why is that? Well, it's because sometimes highly agreeable people will agree with you just to avoid conflict. So the problem with agreeable people is that agreeable people like to be liked. Although this is generally a good thing, at its extremes, it can be problematic because it can lead to people pleasing. And you might be saying to yourself, well, Kwame, if I'm the person that they're pleasing, how is that a bad thing? Well, I'm glad you asked. If someone's agreeable nature leads them to people please, they're often willing to undermine their own wants, needs, and goals because they don't want to risk somebody disliking them. This leads to issues with compliance down the road because they're not truly committed to the plan. As a leader, you need to recognize that even if someone agrees with everything you say, it might not necessarily mean that they are truly committed. You may find yourself needing to invite resistance because it doesn't come naturally to your agreeable teammate. To do this, manufacture a little bit of controlled conflict to see how they truly feel about the situation. You can ask things like, what are your concerns? Or what would you like to change? Or even, what problems do you see? You need to draw out their objections and concerns because they might not feel comfortable sharing them without prompting. Another challenge when leading agreeable people is that they often don't feel comfortable contributing in group discussions if they feel like they hold an unpopular position. This causes the team to miss out on their valuable contributions. As a leader, it is your responsibility to help them to engage by creating psychological safety. This means that you need to build up the relationship to a point where they trust you. Then you can encourage them to share their thoughts. The real challenge with leading agreeable people is that it seems easy. Take the time to encourage them to contribute to the discussion in a way that makes them feel safe, so the team doesn't miss out on their valuable contributions. Disagreeable people. Every team has one. But the question is, as a leader, what can we do to persuade them? It can be challenging, but it's doable. Let's talk about how you can lead the difficult people on your team in spite of their particular challenges. First off, let's clarify what it means to be low in agreeableness. Disagreeable people tend not to care whether or not you like them. If they hold an unpopular position or they disagree with you, you're going to hear about it, which isn't a bad thing. The challenge is that they might deliver the message in a way that is abrasive. We can describe them as prickly people. They're not naturally nice or friendly, and they tend to be suspicious and pessimistic. For you as a leader, it's important to manage your own expectations for how much time and effort it will take to persuade disagreeable people. Understand that conversations with disagreeable people take more emotional and cognitive resources. It's going to take more energy, more time, and more objectively verified information to get them to change their position, perspective, or behavior. Don't take it personally. Next, put the disagreeable people on your team in positions where they are likely to succeed. Consider them for roles that require someone with a thick skin who can stand firm in the face of difficult situations. For example, let's say you're in a negotiation. When it comes to the more transactional part of the negotiation, where you need to protect your interests while at the same time seeking to claim more value for your company, disagreeable people tend to shine. Also, because of their ability to think critically and see the flaws in the reasoning of others, they tend to be good at playing the assigned role of devil's advocate in group discussions. Remember, it's important to make sure that the other people in the group understand that this is their role so they don't take the criticism too personally. It can be difficult and at times frustrating to lead people who are higher in disagreeableness. However, if you understand their strengths, they can be a powerful asset to your team. Take some time and think about how you can channel the positive aspects of their personality in a way that is beneficial to your team. Who is the most organized person on your team? Most likely, somebody came to mind, and that person is probably pretty high in conscientiousness, and they're likely a high performer who is incredibly reliable, which is good. However, there's some hidden challenges that you should know. Before we go into that though, let's take a look at what we mean by conscientiousness. Conscientious people are reliable, dependable, organized, and responsible. If you need something done, you ask them. They excel in positions where there is some level of consistency because consistency allows them to create systems that maintain order. A lack of order makes them feel uncomfortable and anxious. But you may see another pattern emerge that is a bit of a challenge when you're managing them. They tend to resist anything that they think might threaten their reliability. This might make them seem rigid or inflexible, but it's not that they don't like change per se, it's that they don't like the risk of inconsistent or substandard performance. So here's an example. If you're implementing a new program in your company that will eventually lead to higher levels of efficiency, you might be surprised that a conscientious member of your team is actually against the program. One of the reasons might be because during the transition stage, they might not be as effective as they'd like to be because of their unfamiliarity with the new program. You might continue to face resistance until you clearly articulate how you're going to solve that problem for them. Here's how you can work through that. One of the most powerful persuasive tools at your disposal is the use of a targeted, open-ended question. Focus them on the big picture by asking questions that cause them to think about the future. A future with consistency, reliability, and improved performance. You could ask something like, if we were to get this system to work, what impact would that have on your productivity? This is a simple but powerful way to begin the persuasive process. On the other hand, if you're leading someone who is low in conscientiousness, these are people who aren't as organized, consistent, or reliable, you're going to need to bring structure to the chaos without being overly restrictive. Invite them into the process of explicitly creating a framework of expectations and behaviors that work for them. Now, this might surprise you, but this is me. I can be organized when I have to be, but it's not easy and it's not natural for me. This is where my chief operating officer has to manage me. We work together to create structures and systems that work for me. This helps us to clearly identify times when things are getting out of order. You can do the same thing with the person on your team who is low in conscientiousness. Work with them to create a plan, and when they start to draw outside the lines, you can gently remind them of the agreement that you made. With conscientiousness, it's all about setting up an environment that promotes success. For those on your team who are high in conscientiousness, make sure you're not making it more difficult for them to perform at a high level. And for those who are lower in conscientiousness, be creative and collaborate with them in order to develop ways in which they can flourish. Whenever I present, I always get questions about emotions. This is because managing emotions is incredibly challenging and sometimes awkward. What makes it even harder is that people experience emotions differently. There are several things that contribute to this, but one of the biggest contributors is a person's level of neuroticism. Now, it's important to note that I'm not using the word neurotic as an insult. When we're talking about neuroticism as a personality trait, we're talking about how much a person is going to experience negative emotions. Here's how you can begin to identify somebody's level of neuroticism. People who are high in neuroticism are going to be more likely to experience emotions like worry, fear, and anxiety. Not only are these emotions stronger, but they also last longer. On the low end of neuroticism, you'll see people who are calm, cool, and collected. It takes a lot to get them worried or concerned. James Bond is a good example of someone who is very low in neuroticism. The people on your team who are low in neuroticism tend to operate without a sense of urgency, which sometimes leads them to take too long to take action. For example, if you have somebody on your team who is low in neuroticism, you might need to spend some time creating mechanisms that can get them to take a project or challenge seriously earlier on in the process, so they can operate with a greater sense of urgency. This will make it more likely for them to take action in a timely manner. What are the challenges when persuading someone who is high in neuroticism? The biggest challenge is their concerns. You need to find ways to overcome their negative emotional responses to difficult situations or conversations. In your attempts to lead or persuade someone who is high in neuroticism, you want to make sure that they leave feeling as though you've heard their concerns and you're taking their concerns seriously. It might be beneficial to make the first conversation just a listening conversation where you empathize, build trust, and gather information as to their concerns. Then you can use that first conversation to set up a second conversation where you could demonstrate that you heard their concerns and you factored their fears into the solution that you're proposing. Giving them this time will make it feel as though you're taking their concerns seriously. Also, by giving them more time to think, you're allowing them to get more familiar with the plan, which gives them more time to feel more comfortable with the situation. When working with someone who is high in neuroticism, patience is key. They're going to be concerned, worried, and feel a little bit anxious. Next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation with somebody like this, make sure you show high levels of empathy and come up with solutions that address their concerns. You know that friend that you have who's always posting pictures on social media about their latest great adventure? One day they're skydiving, the next day they're off skiing, and then they're off traveling to a different country. This is a perfect example of someone who is high in openness to experience. This means that someone is receptive to new ideas and activities. They enjoy trying new things, and they're intellectually curious. What this means for you as a leader is that this person is going to be willing to experiment and will explore new ways of looking at things. This person plays a crucial role on your team. Because they're so open, this makes them particularly good at brainstorming and ideation. Let them lead discussions where you're trying to generate new ideas. Give them the opportunity to be creative. They would be great at leading innovation and discovering new solutions for the problems that you face. Your biggest challenge when you're leading someone who is high in openness to experience is going to be commitment. Because they're open to experiences, they're relatively easy to persuade at the beginning if you frame it as an exciting new thing. The problem is that it's also easy for them to become interested in something else, which makes it difficult to stick to the plan. So the challenge here is follow through and commitment. So what can you do about this as a leader? First, you want to invite them into the planning process and discuss what the strategy will be. Once they agree, you want to get them to commit to following through for a specific amount of time. And then you want to pre-negotiate what happens next through reality testing. You can do this by asking questions like, what if you change your mind? What do we do if you want to start a different project before this one is done? Gather the answers to these questions and put it in an email, so when they want to make adjustments down the road, you can refer back to the original agreement. So what about people who are low in openness to experience? Well, they're just going to be difficult to persuade. And this is because people who are low in openness to experience don't like change. They tend to be more rigid in their behaviors and their beliefs. So here's a quick tip. For these people, don't frame things in terms of how they're new and exciting. Frame things in terms of how this is just a slight deviation from what you're already doing. They love the status quo, so let them keep it in their mind. You could try saying something like, hey, this is exactly what you've always done, but we've just made a minor change. Whether your team is full of adventure seekers or you have more people that like the status quo, the key is all in how you frame the message in a way that reflects how they see the world. So here's a challenge for you. Try to figure out where the people on your team rank on this scale. Do a quick analysis and create a strategy for your next meeting. When I think about achievement motivation, I think about one of my friends who said, Kwame, success isn't something that I want to have. It's something that I need to have. It's like oxygen. Each breath is a necessity, and I need these wins to survive. Now, that might seem a little bit extreme to you, but to me, it makes perfect sense because I'm someone who's pretty motivated by achievement. As a leader, you can take that ambition and mobilize it to improve your team and your company. So what does it mean if somebody is achievement motivated? It's a desire that people have to perform at a high level, acquire new skills, and experience what they perceive to be wins. The easiest way to tell if somebody is motivated by achievement is by listening and observing. What stories do they tell about themselves? Do they talk about their athletic accomplishments from childhood, awards they've won, Stories that they tell about themselves will give you a big hint on how they see the world. Listen for the keywords of win, lose, earn, and gain. Also look for clues around the office. What do you see when you look around their office? Do you see awards, plaques, certificates, medals, and degrees? When you see a lot of those things around an office, it's a clue that they might be achievement oriented. Once you find out that somebody on your team is achievement oriented, it's time to get the best out of them. Frame your message in terms of how it improves them or how it's a win for them. But in order to do this effectively, you need to know what they care about because people are not achievement oriented in all aspects of their life. For example, you might have somebody on your team who has a habit of delivering projects behind schedule, and they might not be very well organized. This means that they might be low in conscientiousness, so order and timeliness don't come naturally for them. However, at the same time, they're very competitive with regard to being a high achiever in the organization. The challenge for you as a leader is to connect their identity as a high achiever to the timely completion of their projects. If you're able to frame this behavior in terms of a competition, you can channel their competitive energy toward being more organized. Now, there's some potential downsides to leading somebody who is high in achievement motivation. Although people who are high in achievement motivation enjoy challenges, they don't enjoy the prospect of doing anything where failure is highly likely. They like to work for their success, but they are not motivated to work if it doesn't look like their work will pay off. This means that you don't just want to frame things in terms of how it's a win for them. You also want to frame things in terms of how it is also winnable. People who are high in achievement motivation are strong assets for your team. Harness that strength by giving them the opportunity to succeed and improve with everything they do at work. Being a leader means that you have some level of power within your organization. But what do you do if you're leading someone who wants to have power too? Let's take a look at how you can lead and persuade someone who is motivated by power. Someone who is motivated by power isn't necessarily driven to have authoritarian levels of control, although there are some who are. When somebody is motivated by power, it means that they want to have influence over others. The obvious example of someone who is high in power motivation is a politician. However, you can find them in non-obvious roles like a school teacher or a therapist because those positions give them an opportunity to have a significant impact on the lives of others. In your team, look for the people who join groups and seek to improve their status in their roles. People who are high in power motivation may stifle new ideas and discussions in meetings. When they have opinions or ideas, they tend to promote them to the detriment of the ideas of others. Their desire to influence others also makes them very persuasive, which can be problematic if it leads others to concede inappropriately, because we want the best ideas to win, not the best debater. What this means for you as a leader is that you need to make sure that you're creating a group decision-making process where everyone's ideas are heard. This may mean finding creative ways to limit their ability to dominate the discussion. Power motivation also leads people to want to improve their status and position within an organization. They tend to be concerned about their rank relative to others. They always want to advance. Additionally, they enjoy having positions that increase their level of connection to the top leaders of the organization. As a leader, you can persuade them to be more effective in their current role by making it clear how high performance in their current role positions them to advance to the next role within the company. When they can see that connection, they're much more likely to comply with your request. Never let them feel like they're stagnating. Don't be intimidated by someone who is motivated by power. Just make sure that you can show them clearly how their desire for prestige, status, and influence aligns with your goals and the goals of your organization. There are some people who just crave human connection. But what does that mean for you as a leader? Soon you'll understand how you can get the best out of your colleague who is high in affiliation motivation. What does it mean to be high in affiliation motivation? People who are high in affiliation motivation tend to have a high desire to interact with others. For them, social interaction is closely tied to the amount of enjoyment and happiness that they experience. Remember, This is different from introversion and extroversion. Introverts can be high in affiliation motivation as well. They would just rather connect differently than extroverts. How do you lead people who are high in affiliation motivation? Here's the most important thing to keep in mind. They will struggle to perform without an adequate amount of interaction. If you isolate them, it's likely that you will reduce their enjoyment of their work significantly. They're likely to work well in positions that allow them to collaborate and interact with others. For people who are high in affiliation motivation, connection isn't an option, it's a necessity. Make sure you put them in positions that allow them to be with others in order to keep their morale up and get the best work. Risk versus reward. What motivates your team? It's going to be different for different people. Let's talk about when you should frame your message in terms of risk and when you should frame it in terms of reward. Understanding the difference will help you to amplify the persuasive strength of your message. What does it mean to be prevention focused? People who are prevention focused are generally risk averse. They tend to focus on safety and protection more so than advancement and gain. They feel more comfortable knowing that they're able to protect what they already have. How should you persuade someone who is prevention focused? Your message should be couched in terms of security. As a leader, don't try to guess their fears. Ask them how they're feeling about the situation so you know for sure. Once you're clear on what their key issues are, then you can begin to craft your message. You want to make it clear to them that you've taken the time and considered their concerns. For example, if their major concern is time, as you pitch this new program, you can say things like, "This would actually give you more time because," or "This won't lead you to spend more time because." What does it mean to be promotion focused? People who are promotion focused are generally motivated by what they are able to gain. Accomplishments and achievements tend to be very important to them, and they will aggressively move toward their goals. How should you persuade someone who is promotion focused? When you're framing your persuasive message to them, you want to answer the question, what do you get out of this? As a leader, you want them to feel as though they're moving toward and accomplishing their goals. In order to do this, you need to have a clear understanding of what their goals are and what they want to achieve out of this particular situation. Ask questions to find their goals and then frame your message by using what in negotiation we call the acceptance speech test. You want your suggestion or proposal to sound so good that they could take what you said verbatim and go to their friends and brag about it. For example, this is a win for you because it puts you on the fast track to the VP position that you've always been looking for. Risk or reward? Both are powerful motivators by themselves. However, if you're able to tailor your message appropriately based on the focus of your team member, you'll be able to persuade them much more effectively. Congratulations on successfully making it through the course. It's been fun having you. During this course, you've learned some powerful strategies on how you can amplify your ability as a leader to motivate and persuade the people on your team. Leadership is challenging, and you made the right choice by learning about the psychology of personality and motivation in order to give yourself an edge. Now you can connect, persuade, understand, and empathize at a much higher level. So what's next? Don't just make this an academic exercise. Let's bring this to life. Look for opportunities to tweak your message in ways that are custom tailored for the people on your team. And connect with me here on LinkedIn. I'm constantly sharing leadership, negotiation, and conflict resolution tips on my page. Also, if you're interested in more resources, make sure to check out our website for free guides and more information about our podcast, Negotiate Anything. It's the top-ranked negotiation podcast in the world, and we have experts on the show sharing great advice that can help you to become a better leader and manager every week. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you.